Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this chat. I'm Sarah Newman of the Climate Mental Health Network, and I am joined by Lise Van Susteren today, who is a psychiatrist and a co-founder of the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, the Climate Psychology Alliance, and an advisor to the Climate Mental Health Network, amongst the many hats that she wears. And we're going to be talking about dangerous heat today. So I'm going to turn it over to Lise to start.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you all those who are listening. I'd like to start off by saying that one of the ways that I remember uh, either definitions or behaviors or can identify certain things that need to be flagged is I have little memory cheats. And one of the that I use for dangerous heat is what I call arms. So going like this in my mind, when you're walking out on a field or you're outside or something, arms. And this is what I would like to make the point of, which is number one, you're going to be listening to some of uh, um, the descriptors or the markers of dangerous heat. But that's the easy part, because in fact, I think all of us know what it's like to be overheated, but I'll get into that in a second. But to remind ourselves that we're in an ecosystem, and it's not just us and our families and the people that we see, but the general picture. ARMS A, in my mind, stands for advocacy. So your advocacy for actions that reduce the likelihood of dangerous heat is to start a place of starting with public officials, with people who are school administrators, with anyone who will listen to you. And then R is reduce. Look at your own carbon footprint. Look at what you can do to reduce your contribution to dangerous heat. And M is really the management part, which we can get to now. And the management is both the psychological aspects and the physical aspects. Both of those come from the stress of being exposed to dangerous heat. So arms like this is the way I remember how to look at this. So over to you, Sarah. Unless you want me to do my riff, which I can talk about stress. And
Yeah, well, could you explain first when we're talking about dangerous heat and what what is happening to us physically and mentally when we're exposed to dangerous heat for extended periods?
okay, so we've all put stuff in the oven. And we've seen what happens when we put stuff in the oven. It changes its texture. It changes many things that we can see, and it changes many things internally. So here's what I'd like to start off with. What we can see. If you see someone during a hot summer day has been exposed to heat, and that person looks like he or she has the flu, it's not the flu, or it's unlikely to be the flu. It's probably heat exhaustion, and which can quickly turn into heat stroke. So heat exhaustion, let's talk about what happens. First of all, the person may look a little exhausted. Person may say, geez, I'm really tired, and start getting a little dizzy, may complain of nausea. If it gets worse, they vomit. And the reason is that the body is beginning to shut down its functions that keep us from feeling dizzy and sick to our stomach, and potentially high, your cardiac rate goes up as it tries to compensate, because your kidneys are shutting down. Your heart is trying to adapt to the additional demands of blood vessels that are expanding, trying to get rid of heat. So you can see a person is beginning to get sick. So that's what's happening on the outside. And as I say, on the inside, the entire body from top to bottom is beginning to alter. And that includes cognitive issues, for example, meaning anything that has to do with your brain. Your brain, when it's cooking like that, you've been out in the heat. And just imagine what you start thinking to yourself is, I got to get out. It's too hot here. I got to get out of the sun. It's really too hot. So, what's happening also is that your brain is beginning to shut down its best functioning. Its executive functioning is beginning to shut down, which means that your judgment is impaired. It means that your ability to weigh pros and cons that are delicate and nuanced is beginning to get destabilized. It even means, in the worst cases, that some people can't even recognize that they're out walking around in Phoenix or someplace really hot in the mountains. We all say, why were they out there? It was 110 degrees. They lose their judgment. So you can assume that your judgment will begin to diminish if you wait too long. Studies show that people who take exams when they are exposed to dangerous heat are less likely to do well on the exam. So our cognitive function begins to shut down. Certainly, we know how our emotions are. We can all look at those numbers that for every degree or for as the temperature goes up, we can see that that aggression rises. People are more irritable, and we can see this in crime statistics. There are more assaults, more murders, and more suicides. So should come as no surprise when we see those numbers go up. So what's happening is all across the spectrum, from physical, the demands on our body to try to compensate, to cool ourselves, and the emotional ones that make us more difficult to deal with and impair our judgment about needing to get out of the dangerous heat situation.
Thanks. I can share there's some statistics that I've seen of increased temperatures and increased admittance to emergency rooms for people with schizophrenia or anxiety, as the temperatures go up. Um,
I can talk about that too,
yeah,
because
yeah.
these are outer issues, but it's not just our bodies, but it's also the fact that dangerous heat increases the concentration of air pollution. So when we're breathing during times of very dangerous heat waves, we're pulling in more pollution. And we know that air pollution, aside from all the cardiovascular, respiratory, long-term effects, that air pollution on days of poor air quality, the emergency room sees more people showing up for anxiety attacks and more people showing up with threats to commit suicide. So we've got a whole catalog of cascading events from dangerous heat. And, I know I'm saying all this fancy stuff, but we know we don't feel well when it's too hot, when we're too hot. So just imagine, essentially, many of us listening to this, have access to places where we can get ourselves cooled off, but not everybody does. And that's the issue of vulnerability that I think is the moral component of our need to advocate and reduce and manage.
Could you talk a bit about what dangerous heat is doing to how it impacts people who are taking some prescription medicines and what the interactions can be?
Very, very important. Um, First of all, there are medications that you may already be aware of that are contribute to the difficulty the body has in perspiring, which is our natural cooling mechanism. And people who take antipsychotics, maybe for schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or some other major depression, are less likely to be able to cool off in times of dangerous heat because they're not perspiring. Antipsychotics impede the ability to perspire. And they can also alter one's judgment. So that's another issue. Another line is the old-fashioned tricyclic antidepressants. Not a lot of people take those for depression, but they take them sometimes for pain management. And they also impede our bodies from the management of our neurotransmitters. They disrupt the brain's natural mechanisms, and they too can be a contributor to our difficulties in managing heat. Then there are also something that people don't always think about, which is if you're taking a diuretic for like high blood pressure, or you're taking allergy medication for your allergies, or other medications, and you should always be aware of whether checking on something like that. What happens is that those medications also impede our ability to manage heat. Diuretics, particularly, are a problem because they cause a dehydration, and that's one of the key factors in our difficulty managing heat is staying hydrated. So if you're taking a diuretic, you're going to be more vulnerable to heat exhaustion and potentially heat stroke. The same with the allergy medications, different mechanism, but nonetheless, I won't get into the sympathetic, parasympathetic, it doesn't matter. But our ability to manage heat is diminished with many of these medications. And this is just a vulnerable population on medications. We know that there are many other vulnerable populations, and we can get into that if you'd like to, but they're probably pretty obvious.
Yeah, if you could speak about who are especially vulnerable to this dangerous heat, and what should those people do in particular because they're at higher risk?
Excellent question. First of all, as you can imagine, the very young and the very old. The very young, the surface area of their body compared to the amount of heat that they absorb is very much reduced. So the surface of their body, in other words, their ability to perspire, is limited. So they can't get rid of heat very quickly. So young people are much more likely to be suffering from dangerous heat than people who may be older, and their bodies become more accustomed to managing sometimes heat. So obviously workers newly exposed to dangerous heat, those who've been out and managing it before, it kind of trains their bodies, but workers that are outside in the heat, and the elderly, because their bodies just don't perform as well. And oftentimes they have associated illnesses that might impede the renal function, their ability to hold on to sodium when they're perspiring. It's their kidney that holds on to sodium, which keeps water fluids inside the body, etc. All of these functions, their hearts don't function as well. So they're more exposed. But these are the people who oftentimes do have resources. They can, if unless they're living alone, etc., they might be more disposed to being able to get help. But it's people who are, for example, unhoused. And we've got huge populations in some cities of people who don't have the ability to go to a place where they can cool off. And if they faint, we learned last summer that there were many people getting third-degree burns because they would fall on the cement and be burned. So these are the vulnerable populations in addition to the ones we already spoke of. And then there is one other thing that I would like to say about vulnerable populations, and this is more of a psychological one, which is that those who are already anxious about what's happening and seeing dangerous heat, boy, when we see this, our anxiety, the eco-anxiety just skyrockets because the recognition that there are consequences, and these consequences are coming home to roost, is something that is exceedingly damaging and causes enormous amount of fear. And I think it's legitimate, especially if we can turning anxiety into action. Now, what we can do, yeah, what we
Well, I
can,
was going to ask, what can people do both individually and in community aside from try to get into an air-conditioned place? What are other things people can do both to cool themselves physically, but also to be able to support others in their community? And I would also add one other vulnerable population is for people to think about their animals, and that animals are
getting to
very, very susceptible to this extreme heat. And even if you have, say, a dog that wants to go outside, just knowing that it's not safe. If it's not safe for people, it's not safe for animals.
Thank you. And I had put a little asterisk next to animals because that's one of our obligations. And I know that people have sometimes read the Bible to say that we have dominion over animals, but Hebrew scholars say it's not really been read properly. It's not that we have dominion over them, it's that we have a grave responsibility to protect them. And it's not just our domesticated pets, it's animals in general. So our obligation as being at the top of the food chain, with the powers that we have, is that we have that grave responsibility. So what can we do? Well, obviously get out of the sun, get out of the heat, get people out of the heat. And that means that when you see somebody who's got, quote, flu-like symptoms and is out of the heat, that probably means that they're on their way to heat exhaustion or they have heat exhaustion. And it's something that requires urgent action. Get them out of the heat. Get any clothing you can that isn't necessary off them. And hydrate them, but best if you got hydration with electrolytes because they may be depleted from the salt loss of perspiring. And then also, what is very, very important and probably should be one of the first things that you introduce is to get something cool, especially around the neck and the wrist, but especially the neck, because if you'll look, and if you think about it, that's where the big arteries are, the carotid arteries, the jugular vein. If you can get that blood cooled down really fast by something cool around the neck, that's going to cool the whole body off much more quickly. So surface arteries and veins, get those exposed to the cool temperatures. If it's someone who's young, you can throw them in a bathtub of cool water. And if you don't see within a half an hour, if you don't see improvement, you probably need to call either an ambulance or if you're near an ER, get that person to an ER because this can quickly escalate to heat stroke. And or you should take a person's temperature, and if that temperature is above, they will say 104, that means heat stroke. But don't wait for it to get to 104. Wait to see if it's 102 and it starts going down, you're in good shape. Otherwise, get to the ER where emergency action can be taken. So that's what you can do individually. Community, we know what to do. Make sure that your neighbors are following your lead. Lead by example. If you can, get your roof full of solar panels. Make sure that the car you drive, if you drive a car, is the least likely to emit carbon. Make sure that the behaviors you embrace, stay off airplanes if you can, use trains, use public transportation, do all the things that you know are not only good for the environment, but that drive the market. Because if we're doing these things, businesses follow suit. They will invest in behaviors that are pro-environmental. And here's the number one reason people are affected by messages about climate and about the environment: social norms. We are very suggestible. We're social animals. If we see that the people around us that we like and admire are taking action, that's what we do. It doesn't have to be a message other than a behavior. Lead by example.
Sorry, I was muted. No, thank you, Lise, for all that. And I would just also want to suggest on the community side, if you have a neighbor that is elderly or lives by themselves, to check on them. If you don't have air conditioning, find a local cooling center. Communities will often, they'll have libraries open for extra hours, or buses that will just operate with their air conditionings running, so you can come on it and just sit there and cool yourself. You can also, I think go, to like a local fire department where they'll have air conditioning, things like that, and just ensuring that you're checking in on people in your life who are the most vulnerable, particularly, elderly or people who are living by themselves. So
Thank you for adding that. That is a key component of our lives as a good member of a community. And after all, we came from small tribes of community members who all knew each other and took care of each other. And while we're never going to go back to that, I think that that is the cornerstone of what makes us feel a sense of purpose and a sense of well-being, that we help each other. So if we're looking for a sense of well-being in these dangerous heat waves and challenging climate conditions, I think that is one of the best ways for us to renew ourselves. And we need that re-energizing all the time, because this is an ongoing challenge. And it's one that we need to find our footing on, with not only personally, but with each other.
it's a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much to Dr. Lise Van Susteren, and thanks to everyone for watching this.
Thank you, Sarah.